Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Selections from the Weird Library. It's that time once again. I hear my goblin coming. He wants to be in the video, probably. Here he comes. All right. All right. You can be in the video. Here's Bernie. Help me show you some books today. Um, just a little bit of housekeeping here. I don't even know if I mentioned that I have a podcast now. So if you are interested, it's also on this same YouTube channel. There's a playlist for the podcast. Um, Bernie does not appear on the podcast yet. He might start his own podcast, the Barkcast. We might do that. But um, yeah, the AP Strange Show. It's on all your things. You can go check it out. Um, and also it's on this YouTube channel. It's the RSS is fed into a playlist on here. So if you are interested, the most recent one there is with John E.L. Tenney. We're talking about King Kong versus Godzilla. It was a fun time. Uh, yeah, so let's just get into it because I've got some fun things to show you. And the first fun thing is Things by Ivan T. Sanderson. I love this. This is a great old paperback design. It's from Pyramid Press. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Things. I prefer stuff, but Things are also pretty good. And what things, you might ask? Flying saucers, telepathic ants, rocks that can sing and kill, abominable snowmen in Europe and America, and water monsters. So Ivan T. Sanderson is an all-time classic. He was a biologist in the UK, in Edinburgh, and he became naturalized as a U.S. citizen. He's one of the founding people in cryptozoology, one of the very first true cryptozoologists. Um, Wrote about a lot of different Fortean topics, and so I mean, there's a tendency sometimes in my head to categorize authors. I try not to, but it's a normal human impulse to take various authors and say, well, this is this kind of writer. And on that note, Ivan T. Sanderson is a certain kind of writer that likes to do these books that are like collections of odd tidbits. Brad Steiger is another good example of that. Let's see, Vincent Gaddis is another one. Frank Edwards would do stuff like that, and they all have varying levels of expertise and knowledge on the subjects they're talking about. So Sanderson had some scientific background, more so than some of the others, and a lot of these are just collections from articles that they published elsewhere. So a lot of these chapters were actually articles that appeared in like Saga magazine or Fate magazine. And they include globsters and a very particular kind of thing, specific kind of thing out of the things, the whatchamacallits. I love whatchamacallits. So he has live things, dead things, man things, funny things, and nasty things. Nasty things includes the flying rocks, ITF, and the ATA, which ITF. This is another great thing about Sanderson is he was great at coming up with what do you call it? I mean, I don't know what to call it because he would come up with abbreviated words for things like out of place artifacts. So if you were just to try to turn that into just its first letters, I cannot think of the term for this for right now, but out of place artifacts would be like UPA, right? Out of place artifacts. But usually you wouldn't include of, so it would just be like OPA. But not Sanderson, he calls them UParts. So out of place artifacts. So ITF in this actually means wait, I have to make sure I get it right because it didn't make any sense to me when I read it. He's basically talking about teleportation. Teleportation being a term that actually comes from Charles Fort originally. I don't know how many people know that, but he calls it instant transference, which is one word, and that gets shortened to ITF for the instant transference, because ference is nope. That doesn't make any sense to me, Sanderson. But what do I know? I'm not a biologist. Anyway, things. It was book number 1 today. Book number 2, I had been looking for this one, and I just happened to find it while I was looking for something else this morning. And I think it's pretty cool because I really have never heard anybody talk about this book before. It is Magical Tarot, Mystical Tao by Diane Morgan. So I've been reading tarot on and off for quite a long time. And this is one book I bought probably when I first started reading tarot. And it's kind of given me a really different outlook on it because you don't really think of Eastern philosophies like Taoism being connected to more Western tradition like tarot, but this book kind of marries the two together in a way where each card has its own little like excerpt from the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So it gives you like kind of a meditation on each card, and also a very, very specific list of magical keys that help you, mystical keys. So it's the magic and the mystical, and it's really the yin and yang of the card. So it helps you kind of contextualize some of this imagery, which comes out of like Hermetic tradition and Kabbalistic stuff from, the Golden Dawn, because our modern tarot and the tarot that's used in the pictures and as reference points is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the deck that was developed by Arthur Arthur Edgar Waite with the publisher Rider, but all of the artwork was done by Pamela Coleman Pixie Smith. So it's interesting because you have that, you have the pictures from that deck, and kind of they're using that as a basis, but she's interpreting this through the lens of somebody that is a practicing Taoist. And yeah, I mean, it allows you to get kind of a different insight into it. It even has a list of omens and talismans that will be favorable for use when you've drawn that card. I think it's all pretty cool. It's something I've always leaned towards because for whatever reason, I've always been kind of attracted to Eastern forms of mysticism. That being said, she was, she was a teacher of Eastern religious traditions and had written books about like the best guide to Eastern philosophy and religion, and taught at Wilson College and Frederick Community College. So with all of that in mind, my understanding about Taoism is that in practice, in parts of China and elsewhere, it can be very different from different geographical locations to our Western conception of it. But on the same note, this is just kind of like a really cool way to think about tarot in a way that you won't find elsewhere. It's just kind of, I think it's cool, and it's something I've used for a long time, and I've never been much of a by the book kind of guy with my divinatory practices. But this one really kind of helped open the vistas, and I think made me a better tarot reader. So I'm glad that I found that book, because it's something that I've meant to bring up and talk to people about recently, but I didn't know where I put it. So Speaking of books that I didn't know where I put, but synchronistically appeared when I actually needed them, is this one. This one's in rough shape. I ordered it online, but uh, it, uh, the it came in less condition, less quality of a condition than I would have wanted, but it's nice anyway. It is Fairies, a book of real fairies. So this is the Edward L. Gardner, E.L. Gardner book about the Cottingley Fairies. It's a pretty slim volume, and as you can see, the jacket is all messed up. But you have, let's see, you have Francis here with the fairy, and then on the back you got Elsie and her abnormally long hand while she's sitting with another fairy. So I love the Cottingley Fairies story. Um, Sometimes I'll bring this up and I'll say, "Oop, there's an extra book in here." Um, Sometimes I'll bring up the Cottingley Fairies and someone will say, "Well, wasn't that a hoax?" And that's I tend to lose patience in those situations sometimes, because it's like the most absurd and strange stories that you're going to hear, and the ones that people write off as hoaxes, are often some of the most interesting ones to really look at. So even if at the end of the day you're like, okay, these two little girls cut cardboard cutouts out of drawings they made of fairies based on illustrations from a fairy tale book, and then took photographs with them and pretended that they were real fairies for their entire lives. Uh, like, fine, even if that's the conclusion you reach at the very end of it, but like the cultural influence, the ideas behind it, and some of the just kind of spooky stuff surrounding it is worth consideration. And just because something isn't real doesn't mean it's not true. You can take that however you want to take it. Anyway, E.L. Gardner, interesting guy. He was a theosophist. He was a well-respected theosophist. And this is another thing that kind of gets in my craw when we talk about the Cottingley Fairies, is that people, because E.L. Gardner was involved, think that this is a theosophical interpretation of fairies, when it's really a lot more complicated than that. Because when we talk about people in association with something like theosophy, we can't assume that all of their opinions are in accordance with or exactly the same as all theosophists might think, right? So Madame Blavatsky, for instance, very rarely ever mentions fairies. I can't even find the word fairy in most of her books. She does talk about elementals and spirits and things like that. But the theosophy of Blavatsky is different than the theosophy of William Quan Judge, who was running the American section of it. It's also different from, in slightly different ways, from AP Sennett, who was running the London Lodge during her lifetime. And it's absolutely very, very different from what it became under Annie Besant and C.W. Ledbetter. So to have a, and I might add, Gardner didn't agree with Ledbetter on really anything. So like, when people do talk about theosophy, it's kind of, I try to drive home the point that as it's portrayed as like a religious movement or a system of philosophical thought, it's not like it's dogmatic. It really isn't. I mean, the motto of theosophy was, there is no religion higher than truth. So the idea was that everybody involved was pitching in their own little ideas, and nothing was really I mean, as long as you didn't deviate too far from Blavatsky's cosmology. But people freely disagreed with her all the time during her lifetime, and there were debates. So it's not like it's not a monolithic belief system where you have to ascribe to every little thing. And the way Gardner contextualizes this, and the reason he was involved in the first place, was because Arthur Conan Doyle asked him to. Arthur Conan Doyle, famously not a theosophist, he was a spiritualist. But he thought that the existence of fairies bolstered his ideas about spiritualism, which, if you want to get more into that, the very first video I did on this was Spiritism and Common Sense, which got into a bit of this, a bit of the debunking end of spiritualism, kind of from a Jesuit perspective. So, all of this rambling is to say that there's a million different ways to look at all this stuff, but people oversimplify it and say that this person was in this camp, this person was in this camp, to the point where I worry sometimes that people think of spiritualism and theosophy as being the same thing, which it most certainly is not. They're very, very different. I mean, Blavatsky was actively antagonistic towards spiritualists, but this is all, these events are taking place like a good 40-50 years after her death. Gardner is investigating them, and the only time in the book really that theosophy comes into play is toward the end, where he starts describing what fairies are, and he's from a theosophical point of view, and he's describing them as being like devas, which are just kind of like the nature spirits of and the etheric bodies of forms of intelligence that can take form and can take more corporeal form, but are mostly invisible to our senses because they exist on a separate plane of reality. And this all gets really complicated when you get into that cosmology, because now we're talking about the cycle of roots and races and different times and places. But basically, devas are equivalent to maybe angels or evolved spirits that are different than us, less corporeal than us. And to try to break it down as simply as possible, in theosophy, you have these different levels of corporeal reality, where the denser you become, the farther away from God you become, or God, whatever, the divine. And then when you get to the basest, most material point you possibly can, you start to go back up. So it's a process of involution and then evolution, or vice versa. I can't remember which. But the point is that we're supposed to be toward the end of like the most material race that we've ever been as intelligent entities. And the existence of fairies and our ability to perceive them, according to Gardner, was a good sign that we were on the upward tick. We're starting to now see a little bit of overlap between these dimensional planes of reality, which means that we are attaining some level of enlightenment and moving into basically the age of Aquarius, which is going to sound incredibly weird and new agey, but hey, we wouldn't have all of the new age hokum without theosophy. So for better or worse, mostly worse. But it's interesting to note that later on, toward the end of his life, Gardner died, I think, in the 50s. He started seeing the flying saucer phenomena as being the same kind of action, the same kind of evolutionary point in our consciousness. It's another example where earlier we had seen the fairies, and now we're starting to see the UFOs, and they're part and parcel of the same kind of astral, other dimensional reality that we're moving into. So pretty cool stuff. I got really long-winded there. Didn't really mean to do that. But if I were to really pick this apart in the way that I would like to, I would probably be talking for hours, and I would need to be very prepared to do so. But sure, if you want to just write it off as a hoax, do that. It's still cool pictures. even if this is not up your alley at all, or something that you care about, or you just say, well, people were stupid for believing this. I mean, they're cool. They're cool little pictures of fairies in Yorkshire. And I had the pleasure recently, I was very excited when I was at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. They they at the time of this recording currently still have a conjuring exhibit about spiritualists, and they had an original Conningly Fairies photograph as part of the exhibit, and I was pretty thrilled to see that one. It was super cool. So yep, 3 books. We got 3 books again today, and next week, as we're entering more formally into spooky season, because we'll be quickly approaching Halloween, and even more horrifyingly, Election Day. I'm going to try to get together a couple extra spooky selections for you, with some monsters and spooks of certain kinds, and try to keep it more on a theme than I normally do. But I love just jumping around because I'm too interested in too many things to stick to one topic, as you've probably seen. So until next time, we're going to keep it weird, and the next week we're going to get extra spooky.